Satanism, Luciferianism, black magic, demonology, everything that is related to the dark side. This is pretty much what comes to mind when we talk about the left-hand path. Hello everyone, this is Rod. Welcome to Academia Magica. And the topic of today is, of course, about the left-hand path. So let's see if you think if it's really true that this path is such a dark and evil path. Starting from the very first definition of left hand. Left has a very strong connotation. Even in English, it comes from the word lift, which actually meant weak in Old English. In Latin, even more, we find the word sinister, which already speaks for itself. Even in the Middle Age, especially women that were left-handed, just for the fact to be left-handed, they were already considered to be somehow in touch with the demons and in touch with the devil or being witches. So pretty much a lot of unmerited reputation. But first of all, let's start with the proper definitions. So what is the right-hand path and what is the left-hand path according to the definition? So, right-hand path. Right-hand path is a path walked by who seeks the union with the God. Doesn't matter which God, most likely the monotheistic God, but doesn't matter which, is a person that seeks unity with the Godhead, seeks unity with the universe, seeks some kind of, is an objective path. And a typical example, of course, would be the followers of mainstream religions, people that actually accept the dogmas, accept the social rules, accept the morality somehow suggested or some even worse imposed by the mainstream religion, the mainstream society. The left-hand path, on the other side, is a path of independence, is a path of individuality, is a very subjective path. So his left-hand path is not embracing what society, religion define, or let's say may even impose. They actually goes beyond the dichotomy of good and bad, evil, not evil, accepted, not accepted. And this doesn't mean, of course, the left-hand path is automatically refusing everything that the mainstream or the social morale or the social rules are imposing, but somehow these things are filtered through a very individualistic lens. So one of the first pillars that we find as a left-hand path is the concept of antinomianism. Antinomianism is a Greek word which, of course, anti means against, and nomos actually means law, with special reference to the moral law. Basically all what in essence it would be considered negative or evil if you see it from a right-hand path. So the origin of the left-hand path actually is extremely old, and it goes all the way back to the ancient Indian Tantric sects, where for the first time we may have encountered the concept of Dakshinachara, which literally would translate as somehow close to the right-hand path, and Vamachara, again close to left-hand path. So of course I'm not an expert to discuss the Tantric origin, but for sure these definitions were pretty much fuzzy and definitely completely different from what we accept today, what we associate today when we hear the word tantra or tantric. Today basically these words evoke some kind of sexual rituals, but this is actually very far from the original tantric teachings. Although of course in the Vamachara there is a component of sex. There is a sexual component. So we have a record of ritual involving sex, especially working with the bodily fluids like the menstrual blood, the semen. But definitely these rituals were not the main focus. They were not the main point of the Vamachara. the approach of the quote-unquote left-hand side of the Tantric religions. Nevertheless, this sexual component, of course, we will find it interpreted or misinterpreted through the history, through the evolving, through the development of the left-hand path throughout the history until today. Another association that we have when we talk about left-hand path is the association with Satanism. Talking about Satanism in a way that like some kind of devil worshippers, and nothing could be far from truth than being somehow devil worshipper. Not only that, but we can go way back before the concept of Satan, as we find left-hand path kind of approaches in widely found in pagan and Gnostic thoughts. Already in the ancient mystery cults, for instance, we already find this kind of approach to this kind of left-handish kind of approach. You know, in the mystery cult actually was the initiate had a very personal experience with the god. If we talk about the Eleusinian mystery, we talk about the Dionysian mystery, was the initiate going through a very personal experience. It was very different from a mainstream kind of religion. So mystery cults, furthermore, Gnostic sects, and we are talking about from Alexandrian time to the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century, we find these Gnostic sects that basically had a different interpretation of the scriptures, of course, in particular the Old Testament. Let's take in the Genesis, for example, where from the mainstream, from what we are taught, actually in the Garden of Eden, there was this evil snake that tempted Eve to eat the forbidden fruit, the forbidden apple, and therefore God got angry and kicked them out of the Eden, and everything, and the original sin started. This is what the narrative that we have. While from the Gnostics, actually the snake was a good guy, because according to the Gnostic, actually it's the God that is an evil God. The Gnostic thinks that the God, the Yahweh, is actually the evil demiurge who created this material world of suffering. So this evil God Yahweh actually forbid to eat this apple from the tree, which is a metaphor for wisdom and knowledge, forbid men and women to eat this apple, so actually to access wisdom and knowledge, because he was scared that the man and the humankind would progress and become close to the God itself. So in this narrative, in the Gnostic narrative, is actually the snake, is the serpent that is a good guy, because it's the serpent that actually provides and wants to provide mankind with the wisdom and knowledge necessary for his own progression and evolution. And I'm focusing here a little bit on the image of the snake, especially there were two Gnostic sects. One was called the Ophites, from Ophis, which is the Greek word for snake, and the other one, they were Naasines, which is another word that may come from Hebrew, again Naknash, which is the snake. Apologies for my pronunciation. Nevertheless, I wanted to focus on the image of the snake because it's very interesting. Even we see one of the most famous Gnostic god, which is Abraxas or Abrasax, sometimes as it's spelled. And this mysterious but very well depicted and known god that we find a lot in the PGM, we find a lot in spells, we find a lot in amulets and coins. So this mysterious god, as we can see, again, is an unweaped. He has, instead of the legs, it comes with two snakes. So what is interesting about this symbology is because if we see it today, like in the Western point of view, the snake is the symbol of evil. The snake is associated with Satan, all the way back from the interpretation of the Old Testament. While in the East, we find a very different approach. I mean, we know that the snake, for instance, the cobra, was the one protecting the head of Siddhartha when he was meditating under the tree, and suddenly there was a storm. So this snake king just actually covered his head. We have a concept of Kundalini, for example, which is another represented as a snake that goes through the spine, going through the chakras. So in the East, the snake has this very strong association with wisdom, with evolution, with knowledge. which is completely opposite from what we have today. But then again, what I wanted just to say is actually that in the Gnostic, in this Gnostic thought, in their depiction, we found an image of the snake which is very similar, and it must have inherited a lot from the good image of the snake that we may have imported from the Eastern traditions. Another pillar of the left-hand path, as we say, the first one we found was the concept of antinomianism. The second pillar, we may say, is the concept of self-deification. As I mentioned before, that's why it's very wrong to associate left-hand path with some kind of devil worshipping, because in the left-hand path we hardly find any kind of worshipping at all. In the left-hand path is believed that human themselves has already some kind of divine spark inside. They have an inner God, and this is what the whole path is about. It's about to find and get in touch with the inner deity in order for us to become God ourselves, so to become a deity which is a separate and independent deity from what it would be the mainstream religion deity or other gods and goddesses. So you may see here a very strong connection with Nietzsche's thought when he's explaining the concept of the Übermensch, the overman. So for Nietzsche, God is dead, so what is necessary to do for the man is to go over, so to become, he has to take over the position of the God that is dead, and he's talking about this Übermensch, so that the overman. And especially there's very interesting narrative in his Thus Spoke Zarathustra in the chapter called The Three Metamorphoses, that I wanted to bring here because I think it's a very important point to understand the left-hand path. So Nietzsche in this chapter talks about the evolution of a man, and he compares it to 3 stages, where the first stage is called the camel. And in the stage of the camel, the man is actually following the dogma, is actually accepting and following everything that the social rules and morality is imposing. Finally, he moves to the second stage, which he calls the lion stage. So the lion gets rid of all this morality, gets rid of all this, it doesn't follow the rules anymore, and is free from, but he's still free from the things. It's not completely free yet. It's free from rules, it's free from morality, it's free from impositions, but it's only on the third stage, the stage that he calls the child. The third stage, the child stage, is when actually man is free to. So the free from something becomes the free to do things, and it's a free to actually, the child can play anywhere he wants. It's a creativity as its maximum. It doesn't have any structure, it doesn't have any limitation, actually it's pure creativity. And of course we cannot ignore the relation that Nietzsche brings us in the concept of the child to what we have in the concept of the god Dionysus. Dionysus himself is the god, is the rebel god by excellence, is the rebel god who goes against the rules, against the morality. So again, here we find very strong substratus in the left-hand path connecting the Dionysus cult, connected more recently with Nietzsche's thinking and Nietzsche's writings. Finally, trying to make a very long story short, we push it all the way to the 18th and 19th century with the revival of the occultism, where most likely the left-hand path started to take the shape, the closest shape that we inherited today. Through the interpretation, or maybe you would rather say the misinterpretation of Indian religions and association with somehow distorted view of Tantric thoughts, which of course was not the fault of the occultists of that time, but it was also mainly related to the lack of information. So a lot of things were mistranslated, misinformed, a lot of free interpretation that were not really based on any kind of academic or actual reality. And this is the case, for instance, that we find in Helena Blavatsky popular book called The Secret Doctrines. Helena Blavatsky, that by the way was the founder of the famous Theosophy, which is still active today, in The Secret Doctrines, Blavatsky is the first one that define as a right-hand path whatever is good, and he associated with white magic, and the left-hand path, the evil one, associated with black magic. So is Blavatsky first that start to give this kind of dichotomy between right-hand path, okay, white magic, everything is good, and left-hand path, which is black magic, everything is bad. On the other hand, after Blavatsky, we find Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley coming in with a very antinomian position. And Aleister Crowley he took a lot from the left-hand path tradition. I'm talking about the incorporation of sex magic. I'm talking about many, many concepts that he integrated in his thelemic and OTO thoughts, although Aleister Crowley always fell short to define himself on the left-hand path. So he never said so. Although, again, he included and incorporated a lot of left-hand path concepts in his teachings. Finally, a little bit later, maybe the evil concept associated with the left-hand path started to be a little bit smoothened up, especially with the association of Satan to the myth of Prometheus. As we know, Prometheus was the Titan who stole fire from Olympus. He stole the fire from the gods, from Zeus, in order to give it to the mankind. The fire is a metaphor also for technology, anyway, the evolution of the possibility to create things. So Prometheus stole it, gave it to mankind, and for this he was punished by Zeus, the famous story that he got chained to the rock, and every night a bird eats his liver, and then the liver grows again during the day, and then again at night the birds goes there and eat it. This lasting forever. But nevertheless, the concept, association of Lucifer and Prometheus, the bottom line is that Lucifer also, as we see in the Gnostic thought, actually may have been the good guy, because it's the one that actually is trying to teach, is trying to bring men, is trying to give men a path to a self-development that is actually contrary to what the evil demiurge or the evil god would like to have, to keep mankind as his slave. So we have this romantic image, romantic redemption image of Satan, of Lucifer, to be the kind of the good rebel, the positive force against the suppression of that false morality. Finally, getting closer and closer to our modern days, we definitely have a very strong influence in the left-hand path when Anton LaVey in 1966 created a very famous or infamous Church of Satan, which was followed by also the very controversial book, the Satanic Bible, and this book came out in the 1970s. Again, Church of Satan has a very wrong mass perception that is related to some sort of Satan worshiping, and this is really far from the truth. The creation of Anton LaVey, which is actually based on Nietzsche's, as we found it, based on Ayn Rand, which was a Russian-born American author and philosopher known for having created a philosophical system named objectivism. So what LaVey did, he took all these concepts, which are very much related to individualism, is very much related to egocentrism, is very much related to materialism and objectivism, as we see from Ayn Rand, and he put it into his concept of Satan. So Satan itself is not an entity, is not actually the Satan, but it actually represents a concept of going against the morality. So instead of the mainstream religion, which are forcing people to suppress their inner desires, what's happening in LaVey thought is actually saying the opposite, actually, that men should face his inner desires in order to overcome it. So for instance, if you have a food addiction, instead of completely repress it, which it may be bad for you because this repression may come up in some other way, actually you should indulge into it until you are able to overcome it by yourself. So this is, in a nutshell, pretty much the concept. For which, who is familiar with Carl Gustav Jung thought, he may notice here a very strong association between LaVey's thought and what Jung were talking and what Jung was writing about the shadow work, to actually facing our own inner shadow in order to overcome it. Most likely, of course, LaVey may have pushed it a little bit too far in a kind of very super materialistic, super individualistic sort of cult, but on the other hand, he was also the very first one to declare himself and his teachings on the left-hand path. After LaVey, of course, we have several other left-hand path related kind of modern and still existing kind of association. Like, for instance, we have the Temple of Set, which was created by Michael Aquino. Michael Aquino was a high-ranking member of the Church of Satan of LaVey. He had a dispute with him. He created his own, he detached from the Church of Satan and created his own Temple of Set. Again, taking the image of Satan, taking the image of Lucifer, as we say, as the rebel, but he took it, he connected it all the way back to the Egyptian god Set. Again, defining all the concept and what is behind this, it would be very difficult and very time consuming. It would definitely be impossible to explain in this short video. And finally, a very brief note about what is considered left-hand path kind of magic. As we already guessed, that from the right-hand path we may have all the healing, we may have all the theurgy and everything that is bringing the evolution of man closer to the head of God. For instance, even climbing the famous tree of life, so going through the Sephiroth from our Malkut all the way to Kether. So this is all kind of magic that are associated, is associated with the right-hand path, because it's aiming to unite with the mind of God. In the left-hand path, talking about the tree of life, we have the exact opposite. So the shadow of the tree of life, which is called actually a tree of death. And instead of the 10 Sephirah going from Malkut to Kether, we find the 10 Qliphoth. So one key element of the left-hand path magic is definitely working with the Qliphoth, this kind of negative energy. But again, this negative energy always in terms of what we would say shadow work of Jung. So facing these energies in order to overcome it and evolve it. Path is sex magic, inherited also from Crowley's sex magic. We find it in Kenneth Grant, the Typhonian OTO. We find it again in Austin Osman Spare, all the way from his sigil magic, all the way to chaos magic as well. And especially talking about Anton LaVey, so talking about the Church of Satan, the interesting thing is that there was very little of magic as we may think. He divided his system into greater magic and lesser magic. Lesser magic is absolutely 100% a psychological approach. So here we have fascination, we have what we would call today the NLP, the neuro-linguistic programming, is about charisma, is an extremely psychological approach to magic that we find it also in what he calls greater magic, which is like his ritualized form of magic, recreating a kind of psychodrama. And again, the psychodrama, the purpose of the psychodrama, so the purpose of having this theatrical ritual is to work on the human psyche and able to activate the subconscious in order to bring the results. So a lot of emphasis on the psychology, a lot of emphasis on the will, and we find a connection of the will all the way through Aleister Crowley's concept, the famous do what you willed, the emphasis on the power of will, that is coming all the way through LaVey's system. And of course there are many exceptions, but overall is a kind of magic which is very psychological and is emphasizing the strength of the personal will over the agency of spirits and demons, something that we find in Goetian Solomonic magic and other kind of magic where the agency of spirit is employed in order to do the will of the magician. And finally, a few recommendations if you want to dig a little bit more in this topic. I would definitely suggest, of course, all the work of Nietzsche, which is the basic concept for the left-hand path of today. So the Spoke Zarathustra, the one that I mentioned in this video earlier, but definitely also his Antichrist. He's writing the book called Antichrist. But overall, pretty much all the work of Nietzsche, as well as Ayn Rand, as we mentioned, if you want to understand a little bit more about LaVey's concept. And of course, LaVey's Satanic Bible itself is definitely an interesting read. For a more general view, I would definitely suggest Stealing Fire from Heaven, The Rise of the Modern Western Magic by Neville Drury. He has a very interesting, very in-depth chapters about the development of the left-hand path. And finally, fully dedicated to the left-hand path, it would be the book called The Lords of the Left-hand Path, for the Forbidden Practices and Spiritual Heresies by Stephen Flower. So we came to the end of this video. Of course, there will be so much more to explore, and maybe if we find enough interest, that we may have more videos specifically related to the left-hand path, but as an overview, this is all for today's video. Thanks for joining me today. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please make sure you're subscribed so you will be notified whenever new videos will come up. Feel free to leave any comment. Any comment is always welcome, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye bye.